welcome the witnesses today. We're on a interesting time constraint today, so Admiral Boxall, Admiral Negley, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to jump right in and appreciate our witnesses here today. And as we know, we're here to discuss the Littoral combat ship and the transition to frigate. Appearing before us to discuss this important topic are two esteemed Navy witnesses, Admirals Boxall and Negley. Gentlemen, I want to thank you for your service, and just as important, thank you for appearing before this subcommittee on this most important issue. The Navy's developed a broad fleet architecture that presumes a high-low mix of surface combatants. At the high end, in terms of capabilities and cost, the Navy continues serial production of the Arleigh Burke-class destroyers. But at $1.8 billion for each destroyer, the overall shipbuilding plan cannot afford a fleet of destroyers and drives development of a small surface combatant. In response to cost efficiency, Navy developed a Littoral combat ship at a price point of $550 million that is less than a third of their more robust destroyer counterpart. The challenge before this committee is to ensure the correct high-low balance of surface combatants that best responds to fleet requirements in the most efficient manner. My friends, this subcommittee is at a crossroads with the Littoral combat ship program. The eventual transition from the Littoral combat ship to frigate may be the most difficult issue that our subcommittee needs to assess. The Littoral combat ship initially had a requirements foundation that was built on unstable ground. While cost had steadily improved with serial production, the issues of requirement stability, technology insertion, and anticipated employment of the Littoral combat ship still confound the Navy. For example, certain critical components of the mission modules associated with the Littoral combat ship continue to elude introduction to the fleet. While there are many challenges with this program, there are also many bright areas. For example, the shipbuilders at both Austal and Marionette Marine are constructing the Littoral combat ship at a reduced cost and an ever-increasing quality. When I visited the construction yards in Mobile and Marionette this year, the pride of construction and efficiency of effort was evident. These shipbuilders are regional job engines and serve as great examples of American innovation. But great shipbuilders can only construct ships that have a solid requirements foundation. Moving forward, requirements for the Littoral combat ship and the frigate will likely pose the greatest challenge, and I find it imperative that the Navy clearly articulates its desires for each platform to industry. I read the witnesses' opening statements and was pleased to note that the Navy intends to review the requirements associated with the Littoral combat ship program in the eventual transition to frigate. I'm particularly pleased to note that significant support for the fleet is being provided during this requirements review. For my assessment of the program, I believe that additional survivability, increased cruising range, and additional development margin for future expansion are needed improvements. I also believe a decrement in speed could be provided to best optimize these increased capabilities. I look forward to assessing Navy proposed requirements associated with the new frigate program. As the current Littoral combat ship acquisition, I continue to be concerned about the Navy's intended strategy. Ship construction is rife with examples of an immature design being used before it is ready. Invariably, an immature design leads to cost growth. Navy appeared to be set toward repeating this hard-learned lesson with the frigate construction earlier this year, but has since decided to review the frigate requirements, allowing the ship construction yards valuable time to better develop complete designs. In my opinion, this was a wise decision. Another problem with the acquisition strategy is the construction rate proposed by the last administration of only one ship in each of the fiscal years 2018, 2019, and 2020. This construction rate simply does not support both yards. I'm committed to keeping both yards operational until the down select to frigate occurs. I think that we can all agree that we need to improve the Littoral combat ship acquisition strategy and better support the requirements for the transition to the frigate. To best review this issue, I'm pleased that we have our two distinguished panel experts with us today, and I would like to thank them for joining us. We have Rear Admiral Ronald A. Boxall, Director, Surface Navy, N96, and Rear Admiral John P. Negley, Program Executive Officer, Littoral Combat Ships. Thank you both again for testifying today, and we look forward to your thoughts and insights as to how to best improve the Littoral combat ship in the eventual transition of Frigate. I'd now like to turn to our ranking member, Mr. Courtney, for any remarks that he may have.
Thank you, Chairman Whitman, and thank you to both admirals for joining us here today for this very timely and important hearing on the future of the Navy's future frigates. There has been much debate during the history of the Littoral combat ship and the debate of its successor, a new class of frigate, and again, we're back at it. But our debate today is not simply about a name, it's about capacity and capability. 10 years ago, the second hearing I ever attended as a freshman member of this panel was on the topic of LCS. Since then, I have seen this program twist and turn again and again as we've struggled to understand the Navy's shifting plans and requirements. We're not here to rehash the turbulent history of the LCS program, but I do hope that we can take some of the hard lessons learned from the history of this program to help better inform the decisions ahead. As we've heard from combatant commanders, our fleet requires a mix of both high and low-end ships. We cannot afford, nor does it make sense to simply build highly advanced yet very expensive destroyers. The LCS has come a long way from where it began from both a cost and capability standpoint. If the follow-on frigate can expand on the lethality and survivability further, I believe it will be exactly in line with the distributed fleet concept that our Navy leaders continue to say that we need. The frigate, which was the result of the in-depth review conducted by the Navy's Small Surface Combatant Task Force in 2014, provided a framework through which the existing hull designs could be utilized to provide increased capabilities that the fleet desired. Based on previous testimony, the Navy has said that the new frigate will move away from the modular concept of the LCS to a multi-mission capable ship that can operate independently or as part of a larger strike group or even surface action group. There may be additional changes to the frigate's requirements that may be warranted, and certainly there are many valid questions about the way forward that need to be addressed as we begin deliberations in the 2018 Defense Authorization Bill. However, I am very concerned that the Navy and some in Congress could be considering yet another change in approach that could further complicate this program and set back our efforts to meet the force structure needs of the Navy. However flawed the LCS acquisition plan has been over the years, there's little doubt that the shipyards have made tremendous strides. With investment in their production lines and workforce and a relatively stable production rate, the cost of the LCS has come down considerably. And while there's still more work to be done, major disruptions in the acquisition plans and production rates at this point would be a tremendous setback to that progress. This is a panel that understands that shipbuilding is a long game. Affordability and success in shipbuilding requires stability in design and requirements, and above all, certainty in production rates in the short and long term. Constantly changing directions and strategies does a disservice to our industrial base and ultimately to meeting the needs of our naval forces. At some point, we need to decide on a plan and stick to it. We are at a pivotal point both in the future of our Navy and the effort to transition the LCS to a frigate. How we move ahead will have significant consequences for the fleet and the industrial base. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses about their plans to move forward in a way that meets the Navy's force structure requirement, gets the fleet the capabilities it's asking for, and provides the certainty that our industrial base needs. With that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Courtney. Admiral Boxall, we will go to you now for your testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Whitman, Ranking Member Courtney, members of the Sea Power and Projection Forces Subcommittee, good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to be with you today to talk about the small surface combatant class of ships, namely the Littoral combat ship and follow-on frigate. My testimony today reflects the impact of the concept of distributed maritime operations featuring a dispersed and connected architecture of more lethal and resilient ships operating independently or in small formations. In thinking about the concept of a network and distributed force, we conducted a series of war games and analytics that have revealed a set of capabilities our small surface combatants need to deter and fight in a complex, contested environment. These efforts contributed directly to the 2016 Force Structure Assessment released last fall and revalidated the requirement for 52 small surface combatants and focused on increasing the capability of the class. Additionally, 3 separate independent and congressionally mandated alternative future fleet architecture studies conducted in 2016 concluded that the nature of the threats we face required that the small surface combatant class needed to evolve. These disparate but related intellectual pursuits have come together to create a more refined and appropriate set of capability requirements to meet the fleet challenges of tomorrow. We are currently working through the requirements process, taking into account cost and capability trades to optimize the value that the frigate of the future brings to the warfighter. The bottom line, however, is the future small surface combatants must be an even more survivable and lethal contributor in the distributed environment. It would be incorrect to assume that because we're moving to a more capable frigate design that we value LCS any less. Quite the contrary. We need LCS in the fleet as quickly as we can get it to fulfill the mission requirements the ship was designed to meet. Missions that include anti-surface warfare, anti-submarine warfare, and mine countermeasures. The flexibility and modularity of these ships also ensure decades of capability upgrades as they serve their estimated service lives of 25 years. LCS will carry out its missions, and the frigate will carry out others, but both of these members of the small surface combatant family will relieve pressure on the large surface combatant force, which is currently stretched thin. I look forward to your questions today, questions that I will answer as completely as I can, considering the impending submittal of the 2018 DoD budget. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Admiral Boxall. We'll now go to Admiral Negley.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Courtney, and distinguished members of the Sea Power and Projection Forces Committee, good afternoon. I welcome the opportunity to testify today on the Littoral Combat Ship and the Future Frigate Program. Before I begin, I'd like to ask the full text of our written statement be submitted for the record. As the Program Executive Officer for Littoral Combat Ships, I have cradle-to-grave responsibility for the acquisition and life cycle of LCS and the associated mission packages. As we deliver more and more these ships to the fleet, I work in close contact with our fleet partners, and their demand for these platforms continues to be strong. Today, we have 8 ships in the fleet, with 4 more delivering this year. Initial operational testing, full ship track trials are complete for both variants, and the LCS design is stable and mature. 3 Littoral Combat ships have deployed to East Asia, and others have participated in a wide range of fleet operations. As we gain operational experience with LCS, the Navy continues to improve the effectiveness of these ships. Lessons learned from construction, post-delivery test and trials, fleet operations have informed changes that have rolled into the production and the ship design manufacturing process to improve reliability and operational availability. But as the maritime threat evolves, the Navy is placing greater emphasis on distributed operations, highlighting the need for the full complement of small surface combatants, and increasing the need for frigate design with improved lethality and survivability. The Navy is working to ensure frigate requirements deliver the right mix of capability, flexibility, and affordability. We understand the potential implications of the future acquisition strategies, their shipyards, and their workforces, and these considerations we do not take lightly. We are committed to delivering increased capability to our sailors for the best value for the American taxpayer, and that includes maintaining a competitive, healthy industry base. We welcome your input and oversight as we work through the transition of the LCS to the frigate. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to your questions.
Admiral Negley, thank you. And Admiral Boxall, thanks so much for your opening statements. I'm now going to go to our ranking member, Mr. Courtney, to begin the questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Rear Admiral Boxall, recent reporting has suggested that the Navy is taking another look at existing and even foreign designs as alternatives to the current sea frames. In 2014, the Small Surface Combatant Task Force, which testified before our committee a number of times in the last Congress, concluded definitively that both current existing U.S. designs and foreign designs did not meet even current LCS survivability requirements and would require major structural improvements to bring them to those minimal requirements. This was deemed to have even a greater cost impact than a new design. What has changed, and why is the Navy again questioning the exhaustive process of the Small Surface Combatant Task Force?
Thank you, sir. The Small Surface Combatant Task Force, the environment when they created that task force was I'll call it reactive in nature. We were responding to criticisms and to get to a more capable, survivable ship and LCS as quickly as possible. And there was also fiscal guidance that was given to them at the time, but it was direction kind of to them. And I don't want to speak for that force. I was not on it, but as we go through our own analysis, we're making assumptions about the different capabilities, what we think we need. We look at the space, weight, power requirements that we think we need with the capabilities that we've already looked at from the task force, and as we continue to refine that. And as we look at it, we see indications that say, so every capability option you look at and every provider potentially of an offer of the future has to make some changes. And so the question really becomes, how big are the changes and are they going to be cost effective? From our view, we have less data on the foreign designs than we do or most of the other designs in the U.S. But having said that, what we also learned from the Small Surface Combatant Task Force was that we made some assumptions then that weren't exactly right, even with regard to the LCS variants. And so if you take that same thinking and you extrapolate that to what we're doing now, you say, well, we don't know if they can or can't do that with a foreign designer or a U.S. builder with a foreign partner. And so we believe it's in the interest of the Navy to look at the requirements and to be able to include anyone who could provide full and open competition to get us the best capability at the best price. Having said that, there are challenges, like I said, with any option that they'll have to get through to make it happen. We still have a timeline we want to get to because time is of the essence, and we also have capability that we want to get. And the ones that are out there with designs that exist, and we don't have a lot of information on it, we don't know if they will or will not be able to meet what we need.
Great. Well, again, I think in some ways this is sort of the question of the day for our subcommittee. Again, I'm sure there'll be follow-up with staff and other members. Again, I know time is constrained, so I'm going to stop there and let the chairman call on folks from his side.
Thank you, thank you. And we can always come back for additional questions. I know we have a vote here, but we do plan on coming back after the vote. So, Mr. Conway?
Well, thank you. Let me, for the uninitiated, I mean, I've been here as long as Mr. Courtney has, watched the LCS go through its various iterations in the modules. Can you help me understand what the frigate will actually do? Is it a gunship? Is it a missile? What is it that it will provide in terms of capability that you keep talking about? Can you describe that for me? And can you work that into the cost that's comparable to what the LCS currently is running at?
Yes, sir. Certainly, we don't have any final solutions yet, but I'll kind of give you the thinking. Certainly, if you looked at the frigate design as we had that was based on the work of the task force that was originally done, they had taken what was a single mission ship, a modular design where you could put anti-submarine warfare, an anti-surface, or a mine countermeasures mission package into that ship. And so, as we went forward to the Small Surface Combatant Task Force, the output there was to say, let's combine and add anti-submarine warfare and anti-surface warfare, put some more survivability in from a lethality standpoint. We added an over-horizon missile to all mission package combinations. That was a Hull C-frame addition. And so, and that's kind of where we stopped because, again, the guidance on that was the costs. That was about where the need in the curve was for the cost guidance that was given. The difference this time, I think, and we've taken an in-house look from the Navy standpoint. This was us deciding that we said, we've heard a lot of, the design requirements and the GAO report that has talked about, going too quickly to a design without adequately giving it time to think through. And we've got kind of a running start based on the work that we've done. But we do believe that there is an opportunity to get more survivability into the ship to allow it to conceptually in this distributed maritime operations environment that we believe this ship will be operating in for its lifetime.
Help me understand what in that fleet operations.
Yes, sir.
Will this be the outer edge of whatever it is you're doing?
So we are still working
out where this ship goes in the fight.
Yes. So right now the ship is going to be. It remains a forward deployed asset that will kind of be in theater. So it'll be for combatant commanders to combine with carrier strike groups, either operating independently or they could work with them. It is one of the things that we're also looking at now that probably was not looked at as closely with the Small Surface Combatant Task Force was the commonality with other existing systems. So the idea that we could plug and play with the fleet as we needed, whether it be with weapons, sensors, the networks, and those types of things. So that
the networking between, say, a carrier strike group would be as robust as you need.
So one of the things we are looking at to try to do in the requirements is to ensure that this ship can be a provider of information and also a receiver. So it can be a node, if you will, although I don't hesitate to use that term, but the idea that it can plug and play and be used as an asset for the fleet commander to decide in a distributed environment how we can properly use that. So, so really is a combination to operate disaggregated, or if we have to aggregate with other ships, that we would envision it to be able to do that.
Well, a lot of convincing to do going forward. I'll yield back at this point.
Thank you, Ms. Conway. We'll now go to Mr. Norcross.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for your service. My colleagues are going to get into much of the detail we're speaking of. I'm going to talk about capacity and looking down the road with our ever-expanding fleet, and the numbers remain to be honed in on. When we look at what we're producing today, the two shipyards that are going at it, and we're trying to look down the road, we only have X amount of shipyards available to us. There's only so many people who are skilled trades. How much is that factoring into some of the decisions you're trying to make today? Or does that say, well, we're going to be over capacity, this one's going to fall off the edge? Because you have to consider, we have great plans, but if we can't build it, it means nothing.
Yes, sir. Great question. The part of our assessment, part of the design review that we will execute as we look at potential frigate designs, a part of that design will be, can that particular offer produce that design? Do they have the production capacity to produce the design that they're offering? So part of our assessment of the design is also assessment of the capacity to build that particular design. We certainly have two shipyards that have invested a great deal in the Littoral combat ship. That investment, as we talked about, has driven down cost and provided stability. So we want to leverage as much of that work as possible. But part of our assessment of the frigate design will be assessment of the offer to provide the production capacity to build that design.
But let me drill down a little bit on that. So when you're only looking at that one capacity to build that one ship, but overall, there are going to be many more requirements. Obviously, we don't have enough shipyards to put them out the speed that we're going to need them. How do you determine, or is it above you that makes the determination, you know, we want this shipyard to produce this model instead of your model? How does that factor into that final selection?
So again, when we look at, as we come through the design process and then we evaluate the ability of the contract to produce that design, we look at things like workload curves, what's the current workload in that particular shipyard that is proposing to kind of build that ship? Do they have the capacity to take on that additional work to meet the numbers that we've asked for as part of the proposal? So we look at that capacity piece based on what the individual offers are offering to evaluate whether they can meet that capacity given their current workloads, their current manning, their current infrastructure in the yard. Do they have the capacity in the yard from a material standpoint to produce those ships, and do they have the skilled workforce that can produce those ships on the schedule that we need them on?
So what I'm hearing is you're not anticipating any conflicts of capacity?
Well, we would understand what other work, when we're evaluating those proposals, we'd understand what other work is going on in those yards. So we wouldn't do it in a vacuum.
But if you had made that decision last year, it would be a much different scenario than you're looking at it, say, 6 months from now, right? Because a year ago, nobody was talking about the expansion of our fleet the way we are today.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Exactly.
So those demands that are going to come upon us
Yes.
weren't even part of that evaluation.
Correct.
They will be in 6 months from now.
Correct. Right. We'll look across the entire shipbuilding plan to see where we're going to build those ships across the fleet architecture, and then where LCS and the frigate fit to make sure we have capacity in those shipyards are going to produce those ships to deliver on the schedules that we're required to do.
But from what you're seeing now, you don't anticipate any capacity issues from the requirements that you're putting out?
We have to come through the requirements, but no.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Norcross. We are going to break to go vote. We will be back at 4:35, so I would ask all of our members to come back. We have, I think, some important questions to offer, so we will do that. And Admiral Boxall, Admiral Nagley, if you'll indulge us, we will be back at 4:35. Thank you.
Sir.
All right, and we're in recess. I will reconvene the subcommittee on Sea Power and Projection Forces, and our next questioner will be Mr. Byrne from the great state of Alabama. Mr. Byrne.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Admiral Boxall, and good afternoon, Admiral Nagley. Thank you for your patience, by the way. We had this vote. We appreciate you sticking around. Well, we just voted in there an appropriation bill for fiscal year 2017 that includes funding appropriations for 3 littoral combat ships. 3 ships a year maintains an equilibrium with the industrial base and the skilled and experienced workforce of the shipbuilders while driving down the individual cost of each ship, as you've already said. Admiral Nagley, to get to the frigate in FY20, as you have stated, it seems clear to me that the Navy needs 3 LCSs in fiscal year 18 and fiscal year 19 in order to preserve the industrial base and cost efficiencies. Do you agree with that?
So I agree that 3 ships a year from an efficiency standpoint in the shipyard is the right level. That gets us efficient schedules, efficient cost. The number of the ships in those years will be a discussion as part of the POM process for the requirements for the Navy. But certainly from a cost efficiency standpoint, leveraging the investments we've already made in those shipyards to produce ships efficiently, 3 ships a year is the correct number.
Thank you. Admiral Boxall, are there plans to backfit the existing LCF with some of the requirements we can assume will be part of the frigate, like adding an over-the-horizon missile to the Coronado, for example?
Yes, sir. Actually, even as we speak, we have, as you may know, have LCS-4 is deployed out of Singapore, and she is carrying an over-the-horizon missile right now. It is our intention to continue to put an OTH missile on to backfit to LCS, again, making those ships have offensive capability to the extent we can afford to do so is in line with the idea that we want to be very offensive with our ships as well. We have already approved internal to the Navy we've changed the key systems attribute, which is the way we inform the joint process of our intentions to make that a capability on that ship. And so that is we are full on our way. Obviously, as Admiral Nagley will tell you, is we're still waiting for a July response for the request for proposal on the over-the-horizon missile, as you know.
Well, Mr. Courtney and I had the pleasure of being on the Coronado back in July and at sea, and they were very pleased with the operation of the missile. And we heard later from Admiral Harris that he really likes the idea of having those things with missiles out there because he can move them around and has the distributed lethality that we've talked so much about. Do you intend to leverage the money you've already spent on both LCS hulls in the frigate development path to incrementally increase the lethality of these ships as a phased approach to the frigate, especially for the hulls procured between now and the frigate in 2020?
So yes, sir, there's specific lethality and survivability changes that we've already incorporated in the current contract that we intend to install on the follow-on ships based on funding available. So things like OTH lightweight tow, additional magazine protection, protection around the chill water systems that protect the CRAM system. So we have those already as options in the contract to go execute as part of the ships that are as we go forward.
So that's a certain amount of progress towards the frigate before we even get to the frigate because you're incorporating some of those concepts into the LCS until we get to fiscal year 20.
Yes, sir. Some of those attributes would be the same as we were pursuing in the frigate design.
Let me ask you one final question. With regard to the 2 shipyards, obviously we've got several years, more than several years of experience there. We've got trained workforces. They've done the things they need to do to make the shipyards themselves a more efficient way to produce their ships. Is it reasonable to expect that they could continue over the next couple of years without having that same level of production, 3 LCSs a year?
So I would say those shipyards invested and optimized those shipyards for producing 2 ships a year on a 4-month build cycle to deliver 2 ships a year on 6-month centers. So I think if the profile is lower than that, we would be less efficient. There'd have to be other work coming into the yards.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Byrne. We'll now go to Mr. Garamendi.
Needless to say, this is a very troubled water in which we're working here. What's the total number of LCSs that are scheduled to be built?
Well, right now, I mean, the plan is we have through 17 would give us 20, we hit 28 with this, through 17. I don't know the exact, right now.
So it'd be, so we'd have 30 LCSs in the plan right now.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you, sir. 30?
30 in the plan, counting the LCS.
And we've
Yeah.
got 12 that are on, 8 are in the water and 4 more that are about to be in the water?
We have 9 delivered right now, but we have, obviously, when we say delivered, that's, completes delivery. And then we're on a short schedule this year to finish up to the number. What do you have right now?
And so let me just short it there because time will go by.
Yeah.
So we basically have 9, 10, maybe 12 that are out there, and we're going to go to 30, and we don't think they work.
Well, we actually, I think they do work.
If modified and if there's money to modify them. Is that what I heard you say with regard to magazines and water systems and drive systems and so on and so forth? Do you have any idea what the cost of all of that is so that they actually have some survivability?
So let me clarify my statement. So the ship meets the survivability requirements as validated by DOT&E. So the addition capability or addition attributes we're talking about are above and beyond the requirement.
I guess I've missed this whole thing. I was here from the beginning, and all the talk was that about survivability not being sufficient.
We want to get more survivability to improve its ability to do other missions, to take some of that off of the higher end ship. So to get it into the level where, right now the mission of the ship is single mission. It's an anti-submarine warfare, anti-surface warfare, mine countermeasures. So if it's doing those missions in an area that's a higher threat area, then they would need to have a ship with higher survivability with it to protect it.
So in order to do what they're supposed to do, they have to be higher survivability than they presently have.
We think in the future, by making them more survival, it makes them more flexible, and it will take some pressure off the wider force. So we certainly would like to get, I mean, any ship we want to make as survivable as we can for the mission it's been needed to do.
So we should go ahead and build another 20 of these ships, even though they're not survivable in what they're supposed to do unless we increase their survivability?
Sir, as of today, we have only 9 of those ships out there, and they're still in kind of the post-shakedown availability. We only have 1 of the 3 mission packages is operational, but 2 will be coming on in 18 and 19. The ASUW anti-surface mission package is going to be the most capable we have on any ship in the Navy right now. The anti-submarine warfare package that delivers IOC in 19 is the exact same system we have on our best destroyers out there to find submarines, and also has a variable depth sonar and the same helicopter and torpedoes that we have on our very best platform. So they are clamoring for that capability in theater, both with in the Mediterranean, whether you're in the Gulf or whether you're in the
So
Pacific.
given all of that, we're now going to go build frigates, which is different than this. But yet we're going to build another 20 of these, but it doesn't.
Yes, sir. We
Right,
have a
be enough.
requirement right now for 52 small surface combatants and 104 large surface combatants. As of today, we have 80, I think the number's 87 large, and we have 20 small, of which 11 of those are mine sweepers. So you can see we're noticeably short on what we need. So we want to get as many of those out there to assist and ensure the force has more capable anti-submarine warfare, the ability to protect themselves against small boats that are out there. We're seeing these threats today in the Bab el-Mandeb, in an area that has a lot of small boat activity. So these ships will be very welcome in those environments.
Final question, downsizing or down selecting. The frigate already is more expensive and detailed design has not been even thought about. So what do we cost? What's the cost of the frigate that is the follow-on to the LCS, which needs to be upgraded in order to survive?
Yes, sir. So as we come through the requirements process and come through what the requirements, what capability needs to be on that frigate, we'll go through a design process where we'll mature that design. We'll do a service cost mission or a cost estimate of what that design costs, and then we'll do an independent cost estimate to assess what that cost is for the set of requirements that are required for the frigate design. So that's work in front of us to do.
Thank you. Right on time. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Garamendi. We'll now go to Mr. Gallagher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Admiral Boxall, Admiral Negley. Admiral Negley, I think the last time I saw you was at Marinette, so it's good to see you. Somewhat warmer climates than it was that time. I'd like to follow up on what my colleague, Mr. Burns, said, and just make sure that we're all clear on what would happen pending some decisions we're about to make. In a recent LCS hearing before this committee, Secretary Stackley described what he called a very skilled set of labor in the shipbuilding industry. Shipbuilding, he testified, requires unique skills in terms of ship fitters, pipe fitters, and production control in the shipyard. What we can't afford to have happen is a sawtooth effect in terms of hiring and firing at our shipyards. He went on to describe this sawtooth effect, saying, we'll be continually dealing with learning in terms of the labor themselves, and we will lose the skilled labor. They will go to other areas where there is a more stable employment environment, and that will come back to us in terms of cost and quality. So we have to maintain those two key elements in our industrial base, and it's particularly fragile at a time when your shipbuilding rates are below where you believe they need to be. So as I understand it, based on what you've said, what Secretary Stackley has said, anything less than 3 ships in FY18 will indeed lead to this sawtooth effect, which according to Secretary Stackley will come back to the taxpayers in terms of cost and quality. Should the plan to fund 1 or 2 ships this year move forward and we fail to maintain a steady rate of 3 ships entering the shipyard pipelines, layoffs will occur at both yards. Admiral Negley, do you agree with Secretary Stackley's assessment that these sawtooth layoffs would result in significant costs to taxpayers in terms of cost, quality, and schedule?
Yes, sir, I agree with that. This assessment, stability and predictability, particularly in the shipyard, is the key to driving cost and have predictable schedule.
Admiral Negley, I'd also like to follow up by talking a bit about the learning curve associated with the initial development and production of first-in-class ships, and certainly there's been a lot made about what's working, what isn't working. But what extra risks do these ships typically run in terms of schedule delays, cost overruns, or quality issues compared to subsequent iterations? How long does it typically take for these first-of-class issues to sort themselves out?
Yes, sir. So in terms of learning curve, if you look at the first 2 ships we delivered, so LCS-1, I could talk in hours, so we delivered about 4.8 million hours. LCS-9, which is going to deliver this year, is down to about 2.9 million hours. So we've seen across both shipyards production, direct production labor come down about 40 to 60% in learning. So that's cost and schedule that's real.
That, and you'd be fair to say, is real anytime you're deploying a first-of-class ship.
Certainly, there is a steep learning curve to start a new design in a new shipyard. That cost is, that initial cost will be much higher than a ship that has been in production for a while and have captured the lessons learned and captured the changes in line.
And those lessons learned, would it be fair to say, are being captured every day by the men and women who are working on the ship? And just talk to me a little bit about how having that experienced labor force contributes to greater efficiencies and costs that you're realizing every single day in both shipyards.
Yes, sir. So having both a shipyard that's facilitized to produce the ships that the Navy requires and to have a skilled workforce that can produce those ships on the timelines that we talk about is critical. In LCS, we're particularly advantaged. We operated those ships early, so we have a lot of lessons learned from the operational experience, and we're able to fold those into the production lines now. So the learning rate is quicker with our ability to kind of capture lessons learned from underway deployments, fold those into pretty mature production lines, and it's a way to kind of improve the capability quickly over time.
And Admiral Boxall, if the Navy's frigate program were to experience delays following the expected award in FY 2020, how would that impact the Navy's overall ability to meet its small surface combatant requirements?
Well, sir, obviously, we'd like to get ships out there to the numbers that so the faster we get to 52 to meet the requirement, the less load we place on our forces out there. So obviously, that would be an impact if the delay goes. We want to make sure we produce the capability that we need out there in the ships. It would require either working those ships a little more or having the large surface combatants kind of pick up the slack, those types of mitigations.
But I mean, obviously, the large surface combatants are far more expensive, a different set of requirements. So can we get to 355 if we don't fully meet the small surface requirement?
So 355, I mean, one of the challenges we have in the shipbuilding program writ large with regard to the entire force is that I've likened this to a bathtub that's draining faster than you're filling it. So we have the same problem with, there's a lot of ships we built about the time they're starting to decommission. We'll start seeing those ships retire at a faster rate than we're producing them, whether it be large or small surface combatants. So that trend is obviously something that is concerning to us.
Right. Thank you both for your time.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Gallagher. We'll now go to Ms. Bordalia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Admirals. Thank you for your time today. You've testified Frigate Requirement Evaluation Team is redefining the frigate requirements to improve its ability to operate in a more contested environment than LCS and to enhance its role in distributed maritime operations. Now, as I understand it, there is a current effort underway to outfit the LCS and the frigate with an over-the-horizon weapons system, for which there is a wide spectrum of anticipated options that could be chosen, each with different capabilities. These range from inexpensive anti-ship solutions with limited utility in contested environments to highly advanced anti-ship solutions that could hold peer nation surface vessels at risk in GPS-denied environments, which may be the environment in the Pacific area, where these vessels would certainly operate. If the Navy is redefining the role of the frigate, either it is envisioning over-the-horizon weapons as LCS-only solutions, or it is reevaluating the correct capability for an anti-ship missile for the new frigate. Can we expect to see the Frigate Requirement Evaluation Team reevaluate the anti-ship capability needed for a frigate the Navy now says will operate it in contested environments? And the second question to it, how will this impact the scope of the competition, which did not envision such operating conditions and appears to be disconnected with the work of the frigate and the Requirement Evaluation Team?
Thank you, ma'am. We're still working, as I said, through most of the efforts that we're looking at right now is focused on the survivability aspect of that. So you could say improving the air defense capability, so protecting that ship. When you think about survivability of a ship, we look at the susceptibility, which is what we call the ability of it to keep from getting hit or taking out a threat as it comes at it. So the over-the-horizon missile, from an offensive capability, we already have a request for proposal out there right now on the requirement that has been validated for both the LCS and for the frigate in the CDD that we've submitted. So as far as any additional capability, if we put flexibility, for example, if we choose to go with a vertically launched system that could take any other longer range missile in the future, that would be a bonus, if you will. It increases the flexibility for it to adapt to future weapons. But from an anti-surface standpoint, that is not one of the focuses of this team this time, although we continue to evaluate across the spectrum of capability.
Thank you very much, Admiral, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Bordalia. I appreciate your questions. Admiral Boxall, Admiral Nagley, again, thank you so much for joining us today. This is important testimony. Before I begin into questions, I do want to give a shout out to Commander Crossman, who is extraordinary. He was given a mission set when we were traveling to the yards down in the Gulf, and he performed extraordinarily. He even stayed with me late into the evening to have a special shipment meet us back at the airport. So, Commander Crossman, extraordinary performance. I have to thank you explicitly for that. So I want to make sure that both Admiral Boxall and Admiral Nagley realize how valued we are as a Navy to have you there serving our nation. So thank you. I want to begin, Admiral Boxall, by talking about a little more in depth about the capabilities for our upcoming frigate class. There's a lot of discussion about what should be in that requirement set, talking about area air defense capability, enhanced survivability, expanded range, and additional margin for future weapon systems. I think all those things are very critical. I want to get your perspective on what you believe, just generally. I understand you'll be coming out with a requirement, but just generally, what do you think are the most important mission capabilities on that small surface combatant frigate class? And what do you think the scope of cost range that ship should fall within? And I understand that that's going to be something that you're putting out there, but just to give us a general sense.
Yes, sir. First, with regard to Commander Crossman, as a former Kearney CEO, I was also the commanding officer of Kearney, and he's been a great one, known him for a long time. So thank you for that.
Extraordinary.
With regard to the capability of, we are focusing this effort in kind of the main area of survivability, which air defense piece. And when we say area air defense, I think as a former Aegis commanding officer that we think about protecting large areas of against cruise missiles and long-range missiles and things like that. We're not looking at that level. We're looking at something greater than the self-defense capability that we have, which is pretty robust when you include the systems, and I'll keep it at the unclassified level here. But certainly we have a combination of systems that we think work in concert to protect itself in a reasonable environment. And then if you look at towards a more complex contested environment, then we look at you got to look at the quality of the radar. So that's something that we're focusing on. So the quality of the radar right now, we've had a rotating radar. We're having a dialogue on whether a fixed radar or a rotating radar that's solid state is going to be the best choice. And again, when you look at that radar and you look at the combat system and the commonality with the other ones, so its ability to operate with other ships, the destroyers and cruisers out there as part of a network force out there is very important. So we look at communications. Does it have the right comms gear? Is there electronic warfare systems on there that are compatible and can allow for a give and take between ships? So when you look at all those things, and we look at, we don't know exactly what the cost is going to be. Obviously, we had estimates when we were looking at what the frigate would be. Obviously, if we do get more capability, we have a choice of either taking some more things off of there and keeping the price about the same, or increasing slightly. Those are the types of discussions we'll have with OSD and with the Hill to ensure that that we all think going forward we can depend on this level of support for this much capability. We also want to make sure this remains a low part of the high-low mix. So we have constrained ourselves to ensure that we're getting the most bang for the buck, to ensure that we're not making this so big that it will become cost prohibitive to having the capacity that we need out there. So I hope that gives you about the things you were looking for, sir.
It certainly does, and I appreciate your willingness to make sure you have discussions with us on the Hill, because we're going to have to make sure there's a coordination there about what the requirement set ultimately ends up, where that ends up on the affordability range. And as I've talked earlier, for this subcommittee and for the full committee going forward, as we look at growing the fleet, the two elements that I think are extraordinarily important are time and resources. And that means as we're going through this, we have to make sure we use time to our advantage, and that is get from concept to operation as quickly as we can, making sure that we have mature design so we know how to work that, we know how to save money, and then making sure, as you said, to make sure that in the high-low end mix, the low end has the right capability in the right price range, and that we deliver that on time. So scale, as you heard a lot of other members talk about too, scale of production is another important element, because you're going to pay more if you're building a smaller number than you are if you're building a large number. So we want to make sure that we have that scaled properly. Let me ask this, go into the LCS as we see it today, and with the mine countermeasure package not being available until 2021. Give me your perspective on what we're going to do to have that mine countermeasure capability going forward until we get that system delivered and operationally proficient on LCS. Are we going to keep Avenger class going? What are we going to do with Sea Dragon? Can we do that in the Asia Pacific and make sure we have that capability? Because as you know, that's the area, as Admiral Harris talked about, where there's a real demand signal from the COCOM. So give me your perspective on how we make sure we have that right capability now, because we planned on having it sooner than where we will ultimately end up with it.
Yes, sir. So with the mine warfare capability, obviously we keep hearing from both the Pacific and in the European theater that mine capability is incredibly important. And so we're looking at different ways to mitigate now, both with and without LCS. But I will say I'm not the requirement sponsor for mine warfare. That's obviously Major General Owens. Right. But to your question of keeping the Avenger class around, obviously that class is getting tired. Those ships, and so we are at a critical point of making those decisions of do we take the risk or add the cost to keep those at a much higher rate of readiness, and the return on investment, the operational availability of those ships is getting harder and harder to keep. So I won't answer the question for him, but I will say that I think we know that we have to get that plan right, or else the Avenger class is going to, it'll cease being useful, and we'll be caught with a gap. So in the meantime, I know we are working interim mitigating measures, and we're actually finding some innovative ways to adjust to that, both with and without LCS, until that comes online.
Very good, thanks.
Sure.
Admiral Nagley, I'm going to go back to get you to elaborate a little bit on questions that were asked earlier, and that is the Navy's LCS request for proposals had in it LCS projections from 2018 through 2020 at 1 ship per year. And you heard many other members talking about the challenges that faces or provides for the industry, the cost associated with that. Give me your perspective on where you see us finishing out this current LCS design and construction, and what the build out there would be, and when you would envision us moving to construction of frigate class as that decision is made. So if you can give me those numbers each year, what you project we need, obviously keeping in mind the industry, and then transitioning to frigate.
Yes, sir. So for the frigate, we intend to award the frigate by FY20 is our target to get to frigate.
Gotcha.
So we'll have a series of design activities to mature that design to get to a design award, a detailed design and contract award in FY20. We talked about the industrial base and what the industrial base is required to build ships efficiently between now and then. The numbers of ships for each one of those years will be based on the Navy's requirements will be articulated in the budget. So that'll be informed by not all of Navy priorities. So I really can't speak to specific numbers in those years, but certainly from an efficiency standpoint for the shipyards, we've articulated that we think about 3 ships a year or 1.5 per shipyard a year is the right number to maintain the workforce and to leverage the efficiencies from the investment in those yards.
So it would be logical then to assume that going forward, the request would be to keep at that level at least through 19, which is when you would transition in 20 to the new frigate class. Am I safe in assuming that? And I understand that it comes from decision makers above you, but just to be able to get your perspective on it.
So I think there's a desire that we get to frigate as soon as possible. And I think, though, again, the specific numbers in those years will be based on not only considerations for the industrial base and the shipyard, but the competing Navy priorities to budget for those ships. So it's hard for me to predict what that budget, that shipbuilding profile will look like.
Okay. Very good. Thanks, Admiral Nagley. I know we have, I think, a desire for some more questions, so I'll go to Mr. Gary Mendy, who's indicated an interest for additional questions. Okay. All right. Very good. Do any other members have any additional questions? Hearing none, I want to thank our witnesses, thank our members for being here today, and our subcommittee is adjourned.